I'll start the recording. Okay. Once again, welcome to the Fika webinar on whether the LMS is the LMS still fit for purpose. I'm Alan, one of the facilitators for this session and currently serving as part of the ASCILITE executive and organizing this series of ASCILITE webinars this year. For this morning's Fika webinar, I would like to introduce Dr. Julie Williams, Senior Lecturer, Scholarship of Teaching and Learning at the RMIT Learning and Teaching Academy. Julie initiated this session right after the previous ASCILITE conference in December and coordinated with a group of academics from various universities in designing this session. And we are very glad a number of you are here in this session today. So at this point, I shall pass the time to Julie and the group.
Thank you so much, Alan, and welcome everyone, as Alan has just said. Alan, can I drive the slides from this end?
Yes, you can.
Just with the arrow? Yes, beautiful, thank you. So I thought we'd do a whip around so that everyone in the chat and the webinar can introduce themselves. So I think what might be the best thing is if we mute ourselves after we've spoken, just so that we don't get feedback through. So I might hand over, how about Ian Doherty, you go next.
I shall unmute myself now. I'm very good at following instructions. So my name is Ian Doherty. I'm a senior lecturer and we call them a pod manager at Deakin University, but essentially it's a team of both academic developers and multimedia resourcing people who look after the teaching and learning needs, in this case of the Faculty of Arts and Education. So that is my current role and who I am. Thanks, Julie.
Fen, how about you go next? Fran, are you there?
Yeah, I missed that. I had another Skype call coming in. Hi, my name's Francesca Bussi. I work with Ian at Deakin University, and I guess some of my really key interests in this area that I've been involved in quite a lot of building of LMS. I'm an academic, but I work very closely with technical staff to build these things, but also a lot of websites as well, mainly using WordPress, and oftentimes we're seeing our academics work with both WordPress sites and LMS sites sort of interchangeably, and there's a lot of associated problems there too. So I'm really looking forward to the discussions today.
Thank you, Fran. We might go over to the UK now, and how about Liz, you go first.
Right, hi, I'm Liz Masterman from Oxford University. I'm a senior researcher with our academic IT group. So when we run projects, I will go in and do a sort of landscape survey first. And in October 2016, we initiated a review of our LMS, which was a customized version of Sakai. And while my colleague was collecting the requirements, I, using the same data, was doing quite a big study of how the LMS, I should say, because we're in Australia, and is being used within the university, and what alternative provision is also used. So I've got it was quite a big project. So we've got quite a lot of data about attitudes towards it and so forth. We're just migrating to Canvas now.
Thanks, Liz. I'm looking forward to your contributions as we go through, as with everyone else's. Steve, what about you?
Hi, everyone. So I'm Steve Burholt. I'm a learning technologist working in the Central TEL Teaching Technology Enhanced Learning Group alongside Liz. And at the moment, I'm the lead for the templates and baseline work for the LMS implementation. So we're very much looking at things like consistency, the experience of staff and students, looking at maybe competing agendas and competing needs, and how we go about the whole topic of creating an experience that is that allows some freedom within a framework in the LMS.
Wow, lots of good fodder there to commence our discussions. What about Nikhil? I hope I've pronounced that correctly.
Yeah, that was actually very good. Can you hear me well? Hello?
Thank you.
I think
No,
I
we
might be
can
falling
hear
out.
you, so keep
Can you hear me
going.
too? Sorry?
Yes, we can. Yes, we
Okay,
can hear you
perfect.
beautifully.
Okay, I'm from the UK as well, actually a recent graduate of the University of Oxford. Currently in London working for an education technology startup, and actually working with a few universities like Royal College of Art and Ravensbourne that are actually moving away from the classic learning management system. So very interested in joining in the discussion today.
Well, welcome and congratulations on recent completion there. So while we're in the UK, Laurie's just joined. Laurie, I don't know if you're mic'd up yet, but we're just doing some introductions of everyone that's participating today. And if you're ready, would you like to introduce yourself and a little bit about your background? Laurie might not have audio on at the moment. So Steve, why don't we go to you? Oh no, we've been to Steve, sorry. Bill Wade from USQ.
Good day, everybody. I'm just checking if you can hear me okay.
Beautifully. Keep going, it's beautiful.
Again. Oh, that's great. Okay. Hi, I'm by my accent Canadian, but currently working in Queensland, Australia at the University of Southern Queensland. My portfolio is educational futures, and I'm involved in a fair bit of research and scoping around the LMS and better ways to do online learning. Our key thing, a lot of the points that people have raised earlier around flexibility, interoperability, a better user experience are all very central, and we've been asking the question about how do we, what role will the LMS play when there's so many emerging and exciting other innovations coming our way.
Bill, thank you. That sounds fantastic, and I'm go through the discussion a bit later. Karen, would you like to?
Hi, I'm Karen. I'm from Griffith University here in Queensland. I work for a faculty group. I'm a blended learning advisor, but I do a lot of research in student and staff experiences in using technologies and designing with technologies. And I'm coming to the conclusion from my data that potentially LMSs and EdTech in general can't keep up with how people design and then how students want to use them, and yeah, so I'm interested in this discussion.
Karen, and welcome to the group. Scott Grant, welcome. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi Julie, hoping that's coming through clearly.
Beautifully.
Great, thank you. So yes, my name is Scott Grant. I'm from Monash University in Melbourne, Australia. I'm the coordinator of the Gateway and Capstone units in the Chinese major in the Chinese Studies program at Monash. And I'm also a bemused user of the commercialized, institutionalized versions of an open source LMS called Moodle. And I have for the last 10 years run my own separate, fully open source Moodle site. And I'm interested in the way that the commercialization and the institutionalization of an open source platform like Moodle has really molded in one sense, but also, limited what we can do with LMSs.
Fantastic. Thanks, Scott. Donna, what about you?
Hi, can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can. Thanks,
Hello.
Donna.
Oh, great, sorry. Yeah, so I'm from La Trobe University. We currently, like Monash, use Moodle primarily, although we also have Canvas operating in a very small part of what we deliver. I guess I'm really interested, or one of the things I've been thinking about with the LMS is, I guess, how it doesn't really reflect real world systems, how we keep, especially with things like Moodle, we keep trying to replicate what already exists, and how we could develop something that really integrates more with best of breed kind of tools that people are used to using, rather than constantly trying to, I guess, adopt systems that are trying to replicate what sits outside. But then I also recognise that that creates implications for things like learning analytics and getting analytics from systems. So I often say that the best LMS is an empty LMS. So that's sort of where I'm coming from.
Donna, could you just repeat that last thing that you said? A good LMS is
an empty LMS, so that it's actually something where the students actually have a say in, I guess, the systems that they bring in, and also the projects that they work on and the curriculum that they're a part of.
Interesting. Who haven't we heard from? John, are you able to? Is John still online? Oh yes, John's there. John, I don't know if you've got your audio. Let me just. If not, maybe you'd like to use the chat box to introduce yourself.
I think I can be heard now, is that right?
Oh yes, beautifully. Welcome.
Great, thanks very much. Yeah, my name's John Casey. I'm a learning technologist at City of Glasgow College in the UK. It's a very large vocational college. We're currently using Moodle. We're thinking about changing. I'm curious about the reasons for change, and I've become very interested in the last few years about ideas around participatory design, and I'm interested how that might feed into the design of systems we use in the future. That's me, thanks.
Thank you, John. Alan Saul.
Hello, hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Alan from the National University of Singapore. I'm actually one of the academic developers at the Center for Development of Teaching and Learning, and I work closely with academics as well as the Center for Instructional Technology to work with academics on various courses that they are developing on blended learning modules. Yep.
Thanks, Alan. Laurie's just written into the chat that he's having some issues with the microphone, but he's from Windsor, Ontario, Canada, and he's an educational technologies consultant using Blackboard, and they've, let me see, rolled it out in 2015 from a former system, Sakai, being open sourced. So welcome to you, Laurie. And hopefully I've covered everyone. Oh no, Henk Hauser. How could I forget you?
I was wondering if you're going to forget me. Can you hear me?
Never, yes. We could never forget you, Henk.
Okay, hello everyone. I'm Henk Hauser. I work at QUT, Queensland University of Technology. There's a few others from Queensland here. I work in a course design studio, mostly with the Faculty of Sciences at QUT, and we use Blackboard at QUT, which has all sorts of issues and problems. So when I say we use Blackboard, we're trying to get around Blackboard most of the time. So that's, yeah, so I'm interested in different ways of dealing with that. The other thing is I do recognize what someone else said about the issue with analytics as well. if you use a whole lot of other tools. And we do tend to use a whole lot of other tools, so we do get so it's sometimes difficult to to pull all of that together. But anyway, yeah, that's me. Thank you.
Thanks, Hank. Now, myself, my name's Julie Willems. I'm currently working in a central unit at RMIT University in Australia. And RMIT has just moved to Canvas. We've just done some transition of a whole lot of courses, and there's more being transferred as we speak. Interesting similarities and differences, but people are already frustrated as well. So let's move on to the questions. Now, I want to thank all of those who collaborated on our questions for discussion today, and of course, we might even come up with more. Already in our introductions, there's been a whole lot of different topics that have come up. So we might just start walking through. And Henk Hauser, I might let you kick us off with the first one.
Okay, so was the LMS ever, or is the LMS still fit for purpose? From a staff perspective, like I said before, we have all sorts of issues because there's with Blackboard, there are so many limitations, and so from a staff perspective, I think it's not really fit for purpose, and I don't think it ever has been. From a student perspective, again, it depends a little bit on the course, it depends a little bit on the unit, it depends a little bit on the particular context. Because for some students, it's very much fit for purpose in that it gives them a particular kind of structure that they feel comfortable with after a while. From my perspective, I think it's way too rigid. And yeah, but that's kind of the starting point, I suppose. What do other people think?
Thank you, Hank. There's been some interesting. Oh, Ian, I just saw your hand go up and down. There's been some interesting conversations with Scott and Steve. So, Scott and Steve, would you like to share what you've been talking about?
Sure. Maybe I'll jump in quickly. I guess it was just one of those things when you say it's still fit for purpose. It's such a broad brush question. I really think before you can even answer that, you need to define what is your purpose. And I mean, obviously, we have purpose in quotation marks imposed on us from above, and I guess that's they have their particular view of what an LMS is for and how we should use it. And then I think somebody just mentioned before. Each educator will have their own specific purpose for using an LMS. So I think that's one thing we need to be careful when we're talking about this. Whether what kind of purpose are we talking about? I mean, is there any tool ever that is fit for all purposes? And I'd say the answer is no. And also then just raising the question that I mentioned earlier on between the difference between an institutionalized version of an LMS, as we have, where it's completely locked down, and the original flexibility and functionality of the open source version of the LMS actually gave users quite a broad scope to design the way they use it. In comparison to, as I said, I run my own Moodle site where I have complete flexibility to call out to the user community if there's something that I feel I want as part of my pedagogical design that I can't do on my own, whether it's a quiz or whatever it is. I can go out to the community and have a look and see what's already been developed by people. And then if there's something ready made, I can use that. If not, people will come up with suggestions and so on. So, and also for my purposes, with the open source version, I can integrate it very easily with another platform that I use and I have for the last 10 years, which is Second Life, a 3D virtual world. So I think purpose is yeah, it needs to be defined.
Thank you, Scott. Now, Steve, would you like to add?
Yes, I think maybe I should give a bit of context about Oxford. Oxford is a highly devolved place, so it's like sort of 300 different colleges in. Well, it's not 300, but it feels like that sometimes. Everyone is under the same umbrella, but they are doing things very differently, and so. It is very hard to, we see so many different, in implementing Canvas, we see so many use cases that are utterly different, that defining the purpose is very difficult. And in terms of choosing the software, that's exactly what people are doing. So academics are choosing the software, it's not mandated. So we, on our project, I suspect we'll be spending the majority of our time looking at behaviors, managing expectations, listening very, very carefully, and trying to come up with some strategy that will keep the majority of people satisfied to an extent. But the final thing I'll say about the context is that the majority of users of the LMS, certainly the one we've had, have been administrators, because the main use of the LMS has been as a content repository, which for some people is absolutely perfect, and we don't want to discourage that for people that want to use that for that very purpose. But the tools that the LMS has got inside it weren't being used as much, and of course that's difficult if administrators have control of it. And it means that the academics, even if they do know about it, don't have the opportunity to get to know it. So we're looking to Canvas to help us increase the chances of the academic staff seeing the potential and using it where it's appropriate for the style that they teach.
Thank you, Steve. Now, Ian Doherty, your hand came up and down a couple of times. Would you like to add something at this point?
It might be a synthesis, I don't know. When I was at the University of Hong Kong, they instituted the first e-learning strategy, and I was running a central unit that had some responsibility for some aspects of that. And it was interesting, I guess, being in a different culture, but also from the point of view of looking at what we mean from a staff perspective. So if you look at an institution that is implementing for the first time a kind of strategy around an LMS, they want metrics, right? They want analytics. They want some way to show that what they were doing was successful. My argument at that time, which made me deeply unpopular, was the sorts of metrics that they used actually didn't tell us anything about what we really wanted to know about the LMS, which was, is it supporting teaching and learning? So from a metrics point of view, you can look at how many student logins were there, how many times did they download a file, all of this kind of stuff, but it gave you nothing actually about the quality of teaching and learning. So I think my other point is, and it's been made, there's a per case unit. If you think of something like the TPAC model, the use of the LMS in any particular discipline will differ according to the teaching and learning approach that's being employed. So the question of purpose for me is really one whether it can support the array of teaching and learning approaches that we need to employ in a contemporary university. And I would say sit on the fence and say to a degree. I mean, I think there's plenty of evidence that we massively underuse the functions of the LMS that we already have. Does that make sense to people?
That's a very good point.
If we actually thought about what we wanted to do with teaching and learning, the LMS is actually quite capable of supporting a whole range of approaches, from problem-based to case-based to project-based to whatever. It has its limitations, but I don't think we've ever really got to grips with it, because broadly speaking, as institutions, we might not ever have got to grips with the teaching and learning questions that lie behind it.
Mm-hmm.
That's me.
You've touched on something that Bill Wade and Laurie have also raised about analytics. So who would like to talk a little bit about that, because it has come up a couple of times?
It's Bill Wade here. I'll take a little stab at the analytics side of things. I concur with the earlier point that a lot of times we're collecting data that doesn't give much deep or rich information about the learning and teaching experience. We're getting, some predictive analytics. If people are not engaging within the first 3 weeks, we can send out a message through our student support services. So, at a very early stage, we're using it mostly as a predictive tool for student retention, success, and the need for intervention. There's a parallel discourse right now around just the ethical use of learning analytics, and what we're actually using them for in terms of promoting student success. My own sense is we're still very much in an infancy stage with this.
If I can just add to that as well, the point that I've worked at CDU, which was for a while, which was in a Blackboard situation as well, and the analytics thing became the kind of primary focus on university policy around, you're only allowed to use Blackboard as an online environment. You're not allowed to use any other external tools, which is problematic from a learning perspective. But the sole reason for that was that the university had invested a lot of money in analytics infrastructure around Blackboard. So you kind of start to get into a difficult debate about what is the primary purpose. And I agree with Fran on that student learning should be, and that can't be solely, if that's the primary purpose, then it can't be solely confined to the LMS.
Mm. That's a nice segue into our second question about hybrid or alternative solutions that people are coming up with. And as Henk has just pointed out, at CDU, that's Charles Darwin University in the Northern Territory for our UK guests. So they were encouraged not to because of the money spent in analytics. That's right, isn't it, Henk? But what about others? So
sorry, I'll pull back.
Oh no, sorry, Fran. I was just going to say John has just come in and said in some places he's LMS and done their own thing on the open web, and he calls this the outlaw movement. Sorry, Fran, keep going.
Yeah, well, I'd be one of the outlaws, I think. I've and there's more and more. We work with a learning designer and a technical wizard who builds a lot of WordPress sites for academics to use in tandem with the LMS. And these perform a range of different functions. I've used one in the unit that I teach, and I haven't got it right yet. But what this allows for is a connection between the LMS and the opportunity to sort of, for me, to use the WordPress to match my own philosophy of education, as it were, rather than being sort of relegated to the sort of analytics-driven component of the LMS, which is sort of how I see it, particularly as we start to bring in new technologies. For example, at Deakin, we're using a system called Genie, which is tracks all of the students' information, draws down all their information from all their courses as courses to alert them to when particular assessments are due and things like that. So that is currently now driving rework of the LMS environment, which is kind of an interesting question in itself. So it's sort of straddling the fence between what for us is a WordPress environment, because we've got a agreement with WordPress, means that academics have a little bit more freedom. Whether or not they're able to build in as much student agency as they would like is debatable. So that would be my comment on that.
There's a really good side chat going on, because I was going to raise the question. It's not analytics per se. The university would look at the issues around use of external technologies, social media, etc., from a policy, procedure, and risk perspective, which Scott's brought up, and Laurie has also brought up. It's actually, I mean, it's a minefield once you start going into making use of applications and services outside of those that are the centralized ones.
Back to policy.
I find it interesting because I've tried to delve into particularly our assessment policy, and there's nothing in our assessment policy that actually says anything regarding where assessments can sit. And we've had a lot of conversations around what assessment actually is and what the evidence of it is, particularly with regards to third-party tools. So I haven't been able to find anything in our policy. And I also, in conversations with students are often, I understand we have obligations as an institution, but students often think that we're collecting more data and are often less, I guess, anxious about the data that's being collected about them than we think.
Thank you, Donna. That's really a good point.
The
what about some of our UK colleagues? Oh, sorry, keep going.
I was just saying the assessment point is a really good one, because that's usually what it all boils down to once you've done all the risk and the data and everything. And I think the question with assessment is that it has to be any piece of assessment has to be retained and guaranteed to be retained and accessible for, say, 5 to 7 years. So it might not speak, any particular policy might not speak about the tools you use, but it's the question of being able to retain that and guarantee it's retained.
Yeah, I think they're the conversations we've been having. So what is assessment? If you're assessing a performance, you don't retain the performance. But if you're assessing an essay, we assume that we have to retain that kind of artifact. So I'm sort of interested in the ways that social media, or the ways in which people might use social media for assessment, might be kind of more correlated to the idea of a performance, and the assessment is whatever has been is the sort of feedback, I guess, rather than the actual artifact, if that makes sense.
Scott, you had some interesting things that you were talking about in the chat about assessment.
Basically, it was just to say that we've now been given no choice. The university has decided. I mean, this all goes back to I think the university's. I'm not sure how to phrase this. Fear, to some extent, that like with our unit guides, which we have to prepare 6 months in advance, and they are the Bible for students to know exactly what they're getting when they're coming into units and so on, which means that you get into semester and you want to change anything, and then you've got students coming to you and saying, well, that's not what the unit guide said, and so on. There's this whole mentality of having to, I don't know whether it's a fear of liability if students get upset that they're not getting what they were promised, but anyhow, so now there is this move that all of our assessment results have to be uploaded into Moodle. Previously, there were some things we would upload into Moodle, particularly with stuff that we didn't hand back to students, but if we handed stuff back to them, we would record the assessment results in our own spreadsheets and so on, and eventually upload them into the normal system. But now we actually have to have everything in real time up on the LMS, and that's another big move by the university to centrally again control and restrict us, and in a sense is removing flexibility. So that was just the point I guess I was making.
Sorry, I've just noticed Fran Bussey has just written "The Cart is Driving the Horse," which is actually the title of a paper that I wrote a couple of years ago about using social media. So,
See, well, that's a great thing. Look, I think, I mean, regulation has a really important role, and I work in an area where I'm working with academics to develop those unit guides 6 months in advance, and so I know the sort of the whole drill there. But I think that in the effort to ensure that we're meeting those regulations and meeting those expectations, we are losing sight of the primary objective, which is learning. And I think that in that respect, it's problematic. I understand the importance of policy and all that sort of stuff, but I think it also must come back to that original question, which is this benefiting the learning of students?
Liz has brought up an interesting point about privacy issues for European regulations that are coming.
Hi, I've actually lost my audio. I don't know what the question has been for me to answer.
Oh, it was about, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can now, yes. Yes.
Oh, right. It was about the comment that you made about the overlay of privacy issues to protect students. You
Well,
talked about legislation that's coming in.
Yes, well, we have legislation already which requires personal data to be stored in the European Economic Area, and it's becoming quite a big thing. Well, I mean, what will happen after next March is another question, but the existing data protection laws are being strengthened on May the 25th, and we've actually got to do quite a lot of work to show how we're complying with that. And it's certainly been a big issue once we move to cloud hosting. I think Canvas is hosting our stuff somewhere in the European Economic Area, so we're okay. But it does, it's just something that would be a question that be raised if one was to go to an accumulation of different platforms rather than a central VLE where all that stuff is stored. Because it's things like SurveyMonkey we're not really supposed to use because the data is stored in the States and so forth.
Mm-hmm. Bill from USQ, would you like to just talk to the point that you've made in the discussion bar? Because there's lots of interesting feedback about that point as well.
Thanks very much. I'm not sure which of my points, but possibly around the disaggregated solutions. What we're seeing and what I'm reading about through the empirical research and literature and best forecasts on the future of the LMS or online learning for that matter is about the fact that whether we want to admit it or not, disaggregated solutions are in existence and people are using them. So what we do at USQ is we acknowledge that. And we have now run from 2015 an innovation management program called Technology Demonstrators that allows people to actually be those outliers and those cottage industry or pioneers, if you will, but in a managed way so that we can actually learn from it and then trial it further if it's looking promising, and then possibly take it in to replace something that is outdated. So I think from my point of view, that's probably our best approach at USQ to try to manage outliers or outlaws, yes, but is to manage the process and know that that's there, and if we're going to actually leverage some of the emerging technology solutions that exist out there.
Shall we move to the third question about conformity in terms of institutional teaching and learning practices? A few of you were already touched on this, but perhaps someone who we haven't heard from for a while. How about Karen? Oh, Karen, sorry.
Yeah, I think it. Yeah, I think it goes back and forth, doesn't it? So at the moment we're in a period of potentially assessing our teaching and learning needs first to make decisions about our technology. But at the end of the day, money and tends to win that argument. Like we just went through an LMS review, but we ended up staying with our current LMS because I don't think they wanted to wear the cost of what a migration might mean in relation to everything else the uni's trying to do. So it's really hard to take a teaching and learning focus when there's other business practices coming over the top.
Good point. Nikhil in the UK. Oh, Liz, you've got your hand up.
So I'm happy for Nikhil to go first, and I can follow after him if you prefer.
All right. Nikhil, can you hear us? Have you got anything that you'd like to add to the conversation at the moment? Okay, Liz, off you go.
Okay, I think this was something that was quite problematic for us because Oxford has a very devolved model of teaching and learning, academic freedom and so forth. And when we first looking at LMSs back in about 2002, open source solutions were important so that we could build in the flexibility that we needed to support different ways that people want to teach or use the LMS. I think Steve's already alluded to this, and it was it came up again when they chose Sakai, and in the current VLE, well, the review we've now completed and decided to move to Sakai. This was one of the very, very big issues we had. We needed a VLE that was flexible to support the different ways people wanted to use it and had the functionality we wanted. But what we'd ended up with the Sakai VLE was something that was unwieldy. We had a lot of sites that looked more like spaghetti than anything else. Students were not able to find anything, and the whole it had problems with its inherent usability anyway. And so when we started looking around for VLE, the usability became a very, very big thing. And so we're having to work with a sort of trade-off between being able to support our model of teaching and learning. And one of the important things is for students to be able to see courses in other parts of the university that are not necessarily subjects and other subjects. And a lot of LMSs tend to lock students in. They can only see the courses on which they're enrolled. We also have another problem because we don't provision our courses through the student information system. And so trying to get this into a proprietary LMS has been proving quite challenging, and we're working with Instructure on what we can do to canvas in that respect. So that was where that came from, that we need to preserve the flexibility while having a usable LMS.
Very important. Alan Sung, we haven't heard from you about the use of the LMS in Singapore. Would you like to add a few things?
Yeah, maybe I just comment about the current status in our university. I've just mentioned that in the chat that we have been using a homegrown LMS for many years, and based on the feedback that we gather from the academics who are using it, I think they are pretty comfortable because they are pretty used to the user interface and so forth. But from the students' point of view, I think I do agree to some extent that some students, yeah, we do hear from graduate students as well in terms of the usability, because I think their needs are quite different in their sense. And I do agree also that yeah, there should be some studies, to look into the feedback that we can gather from students in terms of using LMS across the various countries and institutions. That'll be interesting to find out. Over to you. Thanks.
Thanks, Alan. And Miguel is on transport and connection is a bit iffy, so we'll just watch the chat function for him. Oh, Bill has just brought up the issue of student voice, and that actually it's a bit of a circular point back to where we were talking about an open LMS where student voice and student control of learning or direction of learning might be integrated. What are some thoughts about that?
I think that's probably the point at which I struggle with the LMS most, is that it's not a space for students. It's a space where students can go, where we can kind of give them things, but it's not generally, I guess with the exception maybe of discussions, it's not really a place where they can interact or produce things themselves.
Thanks, Donna.
But it's a difficult. I mean, that's a really good point, Donna. But it's a very difficult thing to find a space where that suits all students at the same time.
I think, though, Hank, Bill made an excellent point earlier about the LMS as a sort of portal or aggregator. I've varied over the years, and I have not recently, but I've read a lot on the LMS. And you know, there was a JISC report, it was probably 5 or 6 or even more years ago now, where one of the things that came out of it was that students were just putting up, you know, with the teaching and learning and the technologies. I personally, for the LMS side of the thing, you know, if it's somewhere where we can manage content and we can do assessments and those kinds of things, I can see the value in it. But at the same time, we have had these things for maybe around about, like, what, 15 to 20 years. And they are not spaces where students have autonomy, where they can express themselves. Okay, they can on a discussion forum, 20-year-old technology again, where they can be kind of creative, you know, where they can do things like mind mapping, all of that kind of stuff. So I think it's almost as if they've stood still. And I remember, can't remember who told me this, it was someone very senior in one of the LMS LMS platforms said, well, they've stood still because universities really don't ask for anything else. Now, if we were driving it, and we would, you know, this is what we want, and we're not going to keep paying you millions and millions of dollars a year to have a file repository and a discussion forum, then maybe things would change.
Thank you. Sorry, and I didn't mean to cut off. What about some perceptions? And Bill's just put some a link to one of his papers. So thanks, Bill.
Yeah, I'll just comment very quickly on this particular one. It seems to be fairly popular, so if you want to get published right now, you know, do a study on what students are feeling and thinking about, you know, the online learning experience and the LMS. The other, and I think there needs to be more research on that, because it's such a contextualized kind of topic. So getting major themes from multiple jurisdictions and experiences would be very informative for us. I guess the other side of it is the A-code benchmarking exercises that a lot of us in Australia are involved with, so that we can actually benchmark what we're doing in technology-enabled learning, and the LMS tends to be fairly central to that. Some of those benchmarks are very specifically about the student experience, the supports that are available there, and the quality assurance processes that we have to assure that. And I just keep coming around. I know our institution has chosen every benchmark that is related to the student experience this year as our focal point for the A-code benchmarks.
Thanks, Bill.
Can I just say something quickly, Julie? I know that we've spoken that there are many institutions where, like CSD, where you can't use plugins within the LMS, but plugins are frequently, well, so I've used them before fairly successfully, not in all cases, to drive expectations of students and what's expected of them, not necessarily through the platform, but in between the platform. but the problem with that too is that from an education developer's perspective, it then becomes an issue of training people who want to use that kind of technology to be able to actively make it work and to put the time into making it work. So there's an added issue there that even if we are bringing in more things to drive the LMS, we still need to be able to train people to use it effectively, and that has resource implications as much as anything else.
Mm. It's like unraveling string, isn't it?
It's
I just want to... Sorry, Donna, keep going.
Oh, I was just going to say it's an interesting point about, I guess, training staff to use systems. And one thing I've noticed, I guess, with real-world tools, or they're things like WordPress or Slack are actually designed to attract users. So they tend to be, not only do they have great resources around bringing yourself up to speed on using them, but they tend to be very usable because that's what they need to do. They need to attract users, whereas the LMS is really kind of dropped the ball on that, I guess, or a lot of LMSs has, in that, you know, their main focus is management. They don't need to attract users. They've got them. So I think there's quite a difference between the usability of the two kinds of tools.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I just want to read out what Nikhil has contributed. He says, as a recent graduate, he can definitely second the notion that if the LMS, it's where we do stuff to students. Sorry, I just lost the string there with the other contributions coming in. Okay. He and friends never, sorry. He and friends never viewed the LMS as anything more than active downloading of a PDF and didn't feel as though he was missing anything either. Working with the unis now, however, for Nikhil, it's been clear that asking students really is only useful if they're presented with real alternatives such as WordPress and Slack, etc. What about some thoughts to respond to Nikhil's contribution?
Interested in introducing the distinction here between formal and informal learning, and I guess in the sense that if the LMS is basically perceived as somewhere that we do things to students, then we know they are going outside of the systems and they're finding their own ways to communicate and collaborate and using their own tools and technologies, etc. I'm just thinking, I guess, about whether that provides an appropriate balance without mucking around in a major way with what we're doing inside an LMS and all of the problems that entails that we've talked about with risk and policy and procedure and data storage and all of these kinds of things. Maybe the short point is, are we trying to solve a problem that the students have actually solved for themselves already?
What about our colleague from Glasgow, John Casey?
Hi, yeah, it's really interesting discussion. I guess my interest is that this tension between the institution and what works, if that makes sense. And I think we're caught in a bind, really. I don't see an easy way out of it. Yeah, I guess that's my contribution.
No, thank you. And it does summarise really some of the tensions as we start sort of unpacking all of this. So it seems like every point that we've touched on, there's other points to consider. It's not just, it's so nebulous, isn't it? It's probably, Scott's just said, in this conversation, how important is the attitude of academics to use the technology in their teaching? Scott, we're getting close to the end time, but would you like to just quickly talk to that point?
Yeah, just very quickly, I know amongst my own colleagues, so I'm in the area of languages and cultures. For many years, a lot of academics were just simply not interested. I mean, the LMS was there. They use it as a depository because in a way they're forced to, but they're not really interested in using technology in their teaching at all. They don't really see the need. They feel their traditional approach is good enough. And so I just wonder whether that's a factor that should be considered, that not necessarily all academics are interested in using any technology, whether it be WordPress, user-friendly, whatever it is. Maybe it's becoming a less and less important factor as the generations are changing. But I just, was aware of that, say in the last sort of, 5 years or so, that there were still a lot of holdouts.
Yeah, thank you. Folks, thank you so much for being part of today. I just want to, we could continue talking all day, I think, but it's thinking about where to go from here, because I don't want to see this conversation, and it's been such a rich conversation, drop. So what Alan has very kindly set up a Word document which was in the invitation that you received, and it's an area that we can actually start contributing things. But what I wanted to suggest or invite is that we might be able to put together a paper for ASCILITE 2018 or the AGET journal to summarise some of the discussions. I'd just like to call for interest in that suggestion. Oh, that's fantastic. So what I'll do, I might just try and draw the main themes that we've highlighted as headers for a potential paper in that Word document, and then we can do a bit of stream of consciousness, the contributions that we have already made today, and just then put it back to us so that we can refine it and repurpose it. So I'll continue the conversation with you all offline. We'll have to think of a clever way that we can do it so it's not death by email, but a way to progress this forward, because it is such a dynamic conversation. So with 2 minutes to go, I thank our colleagues, Alan in Singapore, Nikhil in UK, John in Glasgow, Steve in UK and Liz in UK for contributing, as well as all my colleagues in Australia. So thanks for participating, and I'm going to hand back over to Alan to finish off.
Thank you very much, Julie and the team here for the engaging session that we had. Yes, I do agree with Julie that we can continue the discussion. And what we have done is we have just prepared a Google Docs, and some of you have indicated your email addresses over the chat. Thank you very much. I'll try to transfer that, or if not, you could just put it into the Google Docs as well, so that we can capture all the context. Anyone who wish to continue this discussion, we will create a platform for us to continue for that. And this particular session has been recorded, so we can actually refer to this as well in the near future. It will be put out onto the website, on ASCILITE website. So once again, thank you very much for this engaging session, and we hope to look forward to meet you again at the next webinar or Fika webinar. Thank you very much. Goodbye. Have a good day.